to address the meeting? Okay, sir, would you like to come forward, please? Please say your name and what suburb you're from, and your comments will be noted in the minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Dudley Meyer of Highgate. It's items 5.1, the trees of significance. I'm a tree hugger. Go back a long time. Stuff like this is not going to encourage a single tree to be grown or retained, and it may even result in some trees being chopped down prematurely. It seems to be more about making appropriate noises so that people think you're actually doing something rather than actually doing it. You've got two choices, the carrot or the stick. The carrot's about providing meaningful incentives or education or informing people. The stick is about threatening people or imposing bureaucracy. This proposal is nowhere near being a carrot. So here's a novel idea. Why don't you actually ask the community, people who've got trees, what they would consider to be a useful incentive? Things like money off, $200 off your rates each year if you've got a tree of a certain size. I'm not advocating that. I'm just saying that's an alternative you could look at to encourage people. There's so many things wrong with this. It's overly bureaucratic. It has logical errors. It has omissions, and it hasn't even been proofread. Just go to clauses 3.1 and 3.2 to see the lack of proofreading. It refers to a landowner without defining who that might be. Is it the primary owner or one of the other owners? And then that's a novel concept that's going to cause a lot of angst in the community. It says that all owners will be notified of the final decision, but it doesn't require the primary owner to be notified or consulted if one of the other owners nominates the tree. I'm not saying that will happen. It's just that it's another example of poor drafting. It allows an aggrieved neighbour to trim every branch that is on their side that's less than 100 millimetres in diameter. Once again, sloppy drafting. And if you want to see something that's even more bureaucratic, just look at attachment 3. It's a real deterrent. The report says the existing policy has onerous criteria for trees to be nominated, but just have a look at what's being proposed. The whole process will discourage anybody. I was getting a headache just looking at it. It's just so convoluted. The report says the existing policy does not provide other incentives. That's wrong. It provides financial incentives, and I think Vincent was probably the first council in WA to do that, certainly near the top of the queue. Also, the fact that the current policy does not allow third-party nominations was not an oversight. It was deliberately done to stop people nominating someone else's tree, resulting in the owner chopping down the tree to avoid the listing. And there's a great example of that not far from here. The owner got wind of the fact that the council was looking at their tree. It was a very large tree. Within a few days, a bulldozer pushed it over. It didn't get chopped down with chainsaws. A bulldozer pushed it over because they were frightened. So just put yourself in the place of a person who has a large tree in their backyard. They suddenly get a letter from the city saying their tree has been nominated. One of the first responses they'll consider would be, should I chop it down before it's listed? And I have to jump through all these hoops, expensive hoops, because I might want to sell or develop later in time. So you have to work with people. It has to be a carrot until a statewide tree retention policy is enacted and not this bureaucratic rubbish. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Your questions are going to be included in the briefing notes that will be available for the council meeting. Okay, and also that item will be the first one. It was already the first one we were discussing anyway, so we'll continue to keep that on as the first item. So there being no further questions, I close public question time at 6:04. Okay, so I understand that there have been no questions and statements in writing. Governance Manager, can you confirm that?
Yes, I can confirm that's correct.
Okay. Acting CEO, do you have any declarations of interest?
I have none.
Okay. Are there any other declarations from any of the councillors present? Okay. So I'm going to find out which items people want to discuss. Councillor Warner.
It was the annual report one. There was something I just needed to flag on that one, 7.6.
7.6. Councillor Wallace?
5.3 and 8.1. Thank you, Mayor.
5.3 and 8.1. Councillor LaFontaine?
5.1. Thank you, Mayor. Lemon?
Yep. Okay. Councillor Castle? Councillor Greer? 5.2. 5.2. And Councillor Wolf? Councillor Hallett? Okay, my item's already there. So then I'm going to move first to 5.1, trees of significance. So do we have any questions in relation to this matter? Councillor Lafontaine.
Thank you, Mayor. One of the reasons for council to approve the listings was that it currently adds significant time. One of the reasons for converting the approval from council to administration was that it causes significant time. I was just wondering, what is the time frame for the process of initially registering to approval of a tree on the inventory?
Mesamon, it's been quite some time since a tree was last put on the inventory. So I guess in terms of specific time frame, I wouldn't have that at the moment, but I think the intent was by administration being able to deal with it within 10 business days, as we put in the policy. That would be a quicker outcome than getting a nomination and needing to fit it within the council cycle. So depending on when the nomination was received, it may not be able to go until the following month, I guess through no fault of anyone's, but just that council timing cycle. So,
yep. When would there, by a landowner, be a need or a want for the efficiency in the process of bringing a tree to the inventory?
Through Mesamon, it was intended just to make the process simpler. So I think at the moment the policy doesn't provide much guidance around what can be expected in terms of timeframes. So in reviewing and seeking to improve the policy, it was about making some commitments from administrations and on what a landowner could expect when they do make a nomination, so that they don't make one and it gets perceived to be lost in the ether.
The inventory mentions, the report mentions that there are 9 trees registered on private land, and the remaining are on public land. Roughly, how many do we have registered in Vincent on public land? Do we know?
Through Mesamon, the way that the inventory is structured when it talks about public land is it's, I guess, grouped around areas. So it talks about, for example, Mary Street in Highgate, Money Street in Perth, and then also lists reserves, so like Hyde Park, Robertson Park. So it doesn't talk to specific numbers of trees, but more just grouped around areas.
The consultation mentions letters to be distributed to property owners of large or mature trees identified by administration. The criteria for nomination is 4 metres. I'm just wondering what classifies a tree as large or mature in terms of height or,
Through Mesamon, 4 metres high and or canopy would be how we've classified that.
How many does the city have or administration have currently registered, be consulted on as part of this process?
Through Mesamon, so the I guess approximate list of trees that could fall in that category, we've got around 200 properties, but that's by no means an exhaustive list, just what we've got available to ourselves.
And in terms of third-party nominations, are there any criteria for a third party as a stakeholder, such as a neighbour, or can anyone in the public be a third party?
Through Mesamon, no, there's no criteria or restrictions on who could be a third party. I guess any nomination would just need to meet the essential and the preliminary criteria that is outlined in the policy for it to be considered.
All right, thank you very much.
Are there any further questions? Councillor Hallett.
This might be better for the briefing notes, but just wondering if you're able to comment at all about this idea of a perverse incentive to, in the process of registering it, that it might get removed, and anything about other ways to incentivise, I guess, maintenance instead.
Through you, Mayor Simon, when administration began its review, there was consideration about where do we land in terms of punitive measures or incentive measures. I think what we're seeing across different local governments at the moment in trying to grapple this issue is no real consensus on what the right approach is. So we landed more on an incentive basis that utilises existing policies and scheme controls that give us, I guess, the best kind of weight and protection without needing to embark on whole new planning processes. In landing on what the incentives could be, it was really about not wanting landowners of trees to perceive that a listing on the inventory would be a negative or would in any way, I guess, inhibit their ability to do maintenance or to look after the tree, which is why through the policy measures we've sought to exempt maintenance from requiring a DA, which it currently doesn't under the policy, but then also providing some financial assistance through I guess maintaining what's currently in there about owners being able to access funding for maintenance pruning, but then also for new trees to be listed, that we could provide financial incentives through advice from our design review panel and engaging an arborist report, which I think our estimates are up to $2,500 in terms of that value, as well as the ongoing maintenance that would be available. So that was where we landed. I guess there was talk about what other maybe more out-of-the-box incentives could be offered, i.e. rates, discounts, I guess when administration canvass different ideas, and I think that's been used overseas. We landed on, I guess, something that was more equitable and wouldn't penalise those that didn't have those sorts of trees.
Councillor Wolf.
Thank you, Mayor. I recall one of the actions from when we discussed this at a workshop was to explore expanding the code definition to include coverage of trees that provide habitat for protected species of fauna. So in the briefing notes would be fine, but I'd be really appreciative of some advice around whether that's something that's achievable both for this policy as well as for the green track assessments that include retaining a significant tree, if we're looking to standardise the definition that we use across both. Thanks.
Councillor Greer.
Thank you, Mayor Simon. Quick question about the consultation. We've got that letters will be distributed to owners of the properties that are registered and other folks with mature trees. Is it also possible to add in there people who have expressed interest in listing their tree and have failed, like going through the process, haven't been able to, or decided not to register their tree, just to see if this will meet their needs? They're obviously quite interested in listing.
Through Mayor Simon, yes, we can do that.
Excellent, thank you. And one last question, just on the page 18 of the council briefing agenda, we've got the definition for the primary owner of a tree of significance. And at the end of that, it says only the primary owner can nominate a tree for inclusion in the inventory. I was just wondering how that interplays with our consideration of the policy of it allowing third-party nominations.
Through Mayor Simon, that was an oversight, and we'll fix that for next week.
Excellent, thank you. I tried to read it so many ways to understand it, so that's great. Yoo, typo.
Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a question picking up from the question in the gallery about the third-party nominations and that incentive to remove. I just want, I'm happy for this to be in the briefing notes if administration could outline what consideration they gave to that issue and whether there might be some options for strengthening for potentially the nomination period. So, for example, once a tree has been nominated by a third party, are there options to put some sort of caveat, not a caveat, but a pause on the ability to act on that tree while that's being determined, but noting that that might have some other outcomes that are not desirable. So I'm just interested if you thought about that and if that's something that could be considered as part of this policy.
Mayor Zamon will take that on notice and provide comments through the briefing notes.
I've got a question. So most of the other councillors that are looking at ways to protect our canopy, noting that the comment from the public was right in the sense that true protection is going to have to come from the state government, not that we're limited. Can you please outline why you haven't decided to go with the model Walga tree retention policy in the way that other councils are? And alternatively, is there a way that we could look at the Walga model tree retention policy in addition to looking at how we can strengthen our significant tree register?
To you, Mayor Zamon. The main reason for not pursuing Walga's model template, like some other local governments have, is the city has a specific provision within its planning scheme which which gives effect to the trees of significance inventory in the first instance. Scheme provision conflicts with the principle of Walga's policy, which is that any tree would require the removal of any tree would require a DA. The city's scheme talks about effectively that the removal of trees doesn't require a DA unless it is listed on the tree of significance inventory. So for the city to pursue Walga's model template, we would need to amend our scheme to remove that clause. That is a much longer term time frame in terms of the scheme amendment process, and then you get through the WAPC and then the Minister for Planning, which can take anywhere from 12 to 18 months. So our focus in looking at how we can address this issue was around what existing controls do we have and what levers can we, pull under our current framework. Our view is that the tree of significance inventory, which has the force and effect of the scheme, is the most impactful way to do that because it's already enshrined in our scheme. We see opportunities to improve the tree of significance policy to have more incentives for people to nominate their tree. Once trees have been nominated and listed on that inventory, the scheme, provides the coverage for them. To the second question about could we pursue both, in short, no, it would be one or the other. So we would either, if we were to pursue the Walga template and as part of that pursue a scheme amendment to remove the tree of significance inventory, then we would lose the tree of significance inventory and all that brings with it.
So can I just confirm that means, because you're talking about the timeframes for this to be implemented, so if we did decide to go down the path and say, well, look, we actually think long term it's better to go with the Walga's template policy rather than looking at an expansion of the significant tree register, which is what we're doing, are you suggesting that there would be a period of time between waiting to get that signed off, that there would be no protections at all for any trees in Vincent?
Mayor Zamon, so the city wouldn't be able to pursue the Walga policy until that amendment had been approved by the Minister, which by the time it's initiated, we go through a consultation period, comes back to council and then goes off to the WAPC, could take 12 to 18 months. So for the duration of that period, it would be business as usual in terms of the tree of significance inventory clause in place. And then only once that clause had been removed by the Minister would we be able to pursue Walga's template.
there any further questions? Councillor Wallace.
So just following, thank you, Mayor. Just following up on that, is it an option to pass this policy now, pursue the local planning scheme update, and then pass the new policy on the Walgers template when that occurs? If that occurs?
Through you, Mayor Zamon, yes, that could be an option.
Okay, thank you. So, sorry, thank you, Councillor Wallace, for getting that clarification, because that's what I was thinking as well. I was wondering whether this could be looked at as an immediate process, either as presented or amended, depending on what council decides, how they decide to vote, and begin that process of looking at the broader the broader template, so that we are looking at a very minimal period of time, or ideally none, where we've actually have no protections for the trees while we have that. That's what I was trying to get clarity on. And that would also, we would also hope at some point there would be a change of heart from the state government, and that they might say we can have trees and homes, which is what the City of Vincent is maintaining. Is that possible to have that with the process, with consultation, with all of those things happening, so that we can limit that time where there's no protections?
Mayor Zamon, we can provide some advice through the briefing notes on what the process would look like. I think just worth reiterating that if we were to go down that route and remove the clause from our planning scheme, when that clause has been removed, then the tree of significance inventory would lose all its weight and everything that currently brings with it. So I suppose there's pros and cons of either approach, and it's not as simple as just removing one and having another.
Councillor Warner.
Thank you. Just looking at some of the notes here, am I right in believing here that there are trees that would be covered under the Trees of Significance register that wouldn't be covered under the WALGA model, i.e. some that are the WALGA model, they need to basically be bigger than the ones that we're seeking to cover here in Vincent with our own register?
Through you, Mayor Zamon. So while we currently can't use WALGA's template, we have sought to take some of the principles from that template and apply it to our context, and I guess improving in some areas. So under WALGA's template, for a tree to for a regulated tree is the term, which would require approval to be removed. That looks at a height of 8 metres. We have taken the approach of how the ARCODES deal with significant tree and looked at 4 metres. So it's less restrictive than WALGA's template in that sense.
Thank you. So basically, potentially, if we had the WALGA model, there would be trees that would be otherwise, if we had our own model, trees would be covered, then there'd be a portion of trees that wouldn't actually qualify to be covered under the WALGA model.
Are there any other questions, Councillor Wallace?
Thank you, Mayor. Just had a question on the definition of the primary owner. I think it says something along the lines of the owner in which the lot in which the structural root zone is within. I guess a structural root zone could potentially extend over more than one lot. Should that be clarified, or would it be a good idea to clarify that and say the majority of the structural root zone or something like that?
Through you, Mayor Zamon, we can clarify through the briefing notes.
Thank you. I had one on the item where it requires it not to be on the state or local weed register. I was just wondering why national was excluded. I did some quick Googling and there's a weeds of national significance list and things like that as well.
Through you, Mayor Zamon, I don't think that was a deliberate decision, so we can add national in as well.
Another one along those lines, polyphagous shot-hole borer hosts, are they able to be listed? Is it worth excluding those? Actually, a couple of the trees on the list may already be hosts.
Mayor Zamon, yes, we can review that criteria.
And then just one on the policy guidelines, particularly the arborist report section. There's a lot of use of the word may and not a lot of guidance on the items that council would consider or exercise discretion on whether to require an arborist's report. I get a response maybe in the briefing notes about some more detail that could potentially be included there, just to give you guidance on when and how council or administration use their discretion.
Through you, Mayor Simon, in terms of the process, the initial thought was, in the first instance, we would get our DRP member to go out on site and have a look at the tree, and I guess depending on the state of the tree and other factors, that it may be enough just to get advice in a more informal way. So we didn't want the policy to commit that an arborist report would be required, but it's just about what the first assessment would be and what would be needed after that.
Yeah, cool. And I think that's a good process. So it's just, is it worth kind of like elevating that up into the guidelines so it's clear to the public that this policy will affect?
We'll review as part of the briefing notes.
That's all I have. Thank you, Mayor.
Are there any further questions in relation to this item? Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to move on to the next item. So, oh gosh, forgot to put it down. So the next one is 5.2. Sorry, so the next item is 5.2, and I believe Councillor Greer, you had some questions in relation to that?
Yep, just the one. So in our proposed trees of significance policy, we've got the R codes plus the grass tree, the Banksia and the West Australian Christmas tree. But in this policy to reduce the development application fees, we've just got the R codes, not those additional species. So I was just wondering if there's been any consideration, seeing as we've elevated those 3 species in the other policy, to also include them in here, seeing as it classifies them as significant existing trees, just to have continuity across the 2.
Mayor Simon, in considering the discounted development application fees, administration was proposing, I guess, a more open criteria. So that's why we didn't specify particular types of trees, but we can review as part of the briefing notes if there's a need to do that.
Excellent, thank you. That was it.
Are there any further questions? Councillor Hallett.
Thank you. Through the Mayor, I just wanted to ask about the choice of the $200 amount for the discount for maintaining significant existing trees. I know that that's what it is against the life cycle assessment, and so it might be about consistency or simplicity of that, but just wondered about how that's a more straightforward compensation for a cost versus somehow coming up with the value of maintaining a tree.
Through you, Mayor Simon, that's correct. It was to be consistent with the ESD, particularly if someone is opting to retain a tree and lodge an LCA. It was for simplicity, as well as considering the average cost of a development application for a single house or all eligible development applications. It represents about a 20%, I believe, reduction in the fees.
Are there any further questions? Councillor Castle.
Thank you, Mayor. My apologies if I've missed it in the papers. I'm just wondering if there's any difference in consideration if a property is intending to retain one significant existing tree or many?
Through you, Mayor Simon, it would just be the one. So if you're retaining, sorry, to clarify, if you're retaining 5 significant trees, you would only be eligible for the worth of 1.
Yeah,
but we can make that
keep
clearer.
Reducing your fee to 0.
No.
I'm happy with that as it is. I just think perhaps it's a consideration for future iterations of this program, if we can see ways to incentivise multiple retention of, we don't want them just retaining only one. I also had a question about the way, apologies if I've misunderstood this, the way the Green Track priority assessment process works. My understanding was that there was also a time saving in the process. Is that still to apply here, but the reduction in fee is an additional incentive?
Through Mesamon, so yes, it would be both the financial incentive as well as the priority assessment, and that's consistent with the current Green Track. So the time saving is not necessarily in the total days, but we have been seeing that Green Track applications are being determined about 2 weeks quicker, but it's about a quicker first assessment, so that's within the 10 days, and then when an applicant submits amended plans, we would reassess them within 5 days of receiving them, and yeah, like I said, that leads to savings further down the line, but ultimately we can't guarantee a more expedited process because it could depend on the extent of departures or other discretion being sought by the applicant.
Thank you for that clarification. I'm also just wondering how that expedited process works when there's the addition of the advice from the design review panel. Is that still able to be accommodated in that quicker timeframe?
Through Mesamon, yes. So generally the green design advice occurs prior to lodgement, ideally, but ultimately how it's been working under the current program is that as soon as we get the application, it's labelled as Green Track, so it's prioritised from the day it's lodged with the city, which means it's referred to our design review panel. Currently, it's an LCA that is getting referred pretty much on day 1 or 2. And if we don't get the comments by day 10, we've got an RFI with them, or we've got it out for advertising or something else, and we'll just give them the comments a few days later. So we'll continue with that process.
Are there any further questions in relation to this item? Okay, so I'm going to move on. So I'm moving on to 5.3, road dedication of right-of-way, lot 66, Leederville. Councillor Wallace, you had some questions.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Just note that we're indemnifying the Minister for Land on this one. I was just wondering what the city's done to try and investigate the current owner of the lot or the estate, and what the city's assessment of risk or liability from future potential complainants or claimants is.
Through the Mayor, that process isn't required as part of a Section 56 dedication. We've spoken at length with the department to confirm that up front before we proceeded down this route, and they've advised we don't need to take all reasonable steps to identify the owners of the land because we can demonstrate that this has been used as a road for the more than 10 years. In terms of compensation, that is not payable for any person that has an interest in the land, including the owners of the land. That's set out under the Land Administration Act.
Why is there a need to indemnify the Minister then if there's no risk of future claims?
Through the Mayor, I can provide some more detailed advice in the briefing notes.
Okay, are there any other questions in relation? Sorry, yes, Councillor Wallace, beg your pardon.
Yep. I think we undertook a few years ago a process to identify privately owned right-of-ways that were, under deceased estate or otherwise abandoned. My recollection at that time was we put one tranche through, but there were potentially others that would also benefit from that process. Is there any benefit, or am I correct in my recollection there? And is there any benefit in wrapping up other laneways as part of this process? I guess just noting it's extremely long, lengthy process to get through the Minister.
Through the Mayor, at the moment we don't have a resource available to administer that process. This has been administered through the Place team as a Place project with some support from our sole lands officer, and we just don't have capacity to be able to consider more that could add complexity.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you.
Are there any further questions in relation to this item? Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next item. The next item I've got is The 7.6, the annual report 23-24. Councillor Warner, you had some questions.
This is just a really minor typo that I picked up on page 90. Accommodation needs 2 M's, which is a personal bugbear of mine. I just needed to share that with you.
Thank you, through the Mayor. Did you say page 90 in the word accommodation? We will
Not 90 of the report, not of, of what we got sent, but yeah, 90 of the actual report. Yeah.
correct that for next week. Thank you.
Okay, so less commode and more accommodate. Okay, is there any other questions in relation to the annual report? Okay, so we move on to 8.1, which is review of policy privacy management. Councillor Wallace, you had some questions.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Acknowledging the existing policy is massively out of date, and we're getting on the front foot to some extent by repealing this now with the PRAS impending probably. It does feel a little premature potentially. I guess what is this administrative standard that's being proposed, and is it available for review as part of this repeal? And I guess I'd also note that we're doing the PRAS readiness review, and would that be ready for review by council as part of this repeal process?
Through you, Mayor Zaman. So the rationale behind repealing the policy is to allow us to put the up-to-date, in line with the Australian privacy principles standard in place, and then to review that once this the PRIS has come into play, rather than advertising a new policy now to then have to repeal and update it later on.
So I guess I'm personally of the view that I'd prefer to defer this until such time that the administrative standard is available for review as part of the same item and the readiness review had been conducted. It feels premature to me to have no policy, or to just repeal the policy and have then no policy in place for the period.
Through you, Mayor Zaman, the main difference between the national privacy principles and the Australian privacy principles, which is where the policy needs bringing up to date, is to consider data breach. So by putting the standard into practice by administration, that would guidance to that area for administration.
Sorry, so the standard has been developed now, or it's being developed?
Yes, through you, Mayor Zaman, that has been developed.
Can I request that in the briefing notes?
Yes.
And then the PRAS readiness review, what's the status of that, please?
Through you, Mayor Zaman, that is a working document at this stage through the Executive Management Committee.
Is there a due date for that?
So that is ongoing. We have a due date for specific actions within that, in line with the PRIS readiness guide that we are working to.
Okay, can I just request a little bit more detail on the status of that and when it's expected to be completed in the briefing notes, and maybe in the briefing notes as well, just what admin thinks the consequences would be if we were to defer repeal of this until both of those items are complete?
Yes, I can provide that in the briefing notes.
Are there any more questions in relation to this item? Okay, so we do have a late addition, a confidential item. Do councillors have any questions in relation to that confidential item? Okay, in that case, there is no need to go behind closed doors. So I want to thank the public and the live stream viewers, and I close the meeting at 6:40. Thank you. You can stop recording.